Welcome back. It's a beautiful, very cold day. It's like 4 degrees outside. It's probably a little warmer now since I got the truck running and got the snow scraped off. And for today's video, I have something special for you guys. A truck that I've wanted. Archie, what are you doing? Okay, hop in. Okay, this is a truck that I've wanted to showcase on the channel for a long time, because this is a truck from my past, from my history, a truck that Dad still owns. Now, I grew up in Wyoming, in a small town. I grew up farming and ranching. It wasn't a big farm and it wasn't a huge ranch, but because of that, it did have some really cool trucks on it, including this one that I actually drove for a year in high school. So I kind of wanted to show it to you guys before Dad tries to sell it today, or I should say before I try to help him sell it today. Archie, quit. And that is my dad's 1980 F150. We had 2 of these old Bullnose trucks. Some of you are gonna really love them. Some of you are not gonna care about them whatsoever, but these were pretty fun trucks to have on the farm. They were both 4-speed manuals with the 306 engine in them. Super reliable trucks, and they got really good fuel economy for the 80s. Now, don't think that my dad bought these trucks brand new. He did not. He bought them in like 2006 to 9 period of time, somewhere in there. And he bought both of them at the same time. And both of them were made in May of 1980. This one was the nicer truck. It was a custom package. The other one was the lesser package. Both were 4-wheel drive, but this one had only like 70,000 miles on it. The other one had like 130 some thousand miles on it. And he bought them to be irrigating, farm pickups, ranch trucks in the wintertime, and pickups he could feed out of. And let me tell you, these were special trucks back in the day, and they're starting to become really popular again. In fact, I have a seller coming up today to pick this truck up from Billings, Montana for $1,200, which we're gonna dive into this truck, and you're gonna see why I am amazed that somebody is willing to pay that for this old girl. That is, if we can get it running. It's carbureted, it's 4 degrees, that battery is dead. I highly doubt that we can get this thing to start. This truck's gotten a lot rougher over the years. He fed 1-ton bells out of the bed, which is why it looks like this, and it's completely trashed and ruined. But this is the only amount of rust that's on this truck, which is really, really rare to find one of these with very minimal rust. I may or may not be the reason that that the bed is in this rough of shape. Has a lot of surface rust down in there as well. We'd always bring the tractor in and set the bell in over the sides, and then you'd have to like let go of the grapple and lift the bucket out. Kind of weird, which I caught one time and completely destroyed that. But if you know anything about these trucks, a lot of the farmers or construction people that had them put these aftermarket, I should say aftermarket, but these custom bed helper plates in them, because all of these beds on these trucks were complete trash. And if you didn't do that, they would eventually crack and break at the sides like I did with the loader, and then they'd wobble and fall apart. And these are really hard to find beds for. And being an F-150, you wouldn't put a flatbed on this, or pretty rarely would people put flatbeds on these. I cannot believe that Dad used these to feed 1-ton bells, but they're super sturdy, super reliable trucks. At least they were for the 80s. You have to laugh at the 1980 Ford commercial for these pickup trucks. If I can sub in a clip, I will. If not, I'll just link it in my description. But they did a lot of cool off-roading with these trucks that they really don't show or do in commercials nowadays. And that's on 15-inch tires with a limited, like, slip, weird 4-wheel drive system that really wasn't all that good. These trucks were also super front end heavy, which, you know, what's new, and they really did not drive that good. They had a solid front axle and a solid rear axle. This was not an off-roader. However, I really did enjoy driving it in high school. Did super well in the snow when you got used to it and drove smart, and it actually did pretty good out here on the farm in big, wonderful Wyoming's fields and bumpy roads and off-road. So I guess you can't complain, because the new trucks, they do a lot better, but this could definitely handle whatever you threw at it. Well, almost anything, that is, except for highway driving. They actually did pretty good at highway driving, but you can see that it's only a 4-speed manual. So by time you had this thrown down in 4th gear, obviously you could go 55 miles an hour and get about 15 miles to the gallon. But in today's standards, you can get it up to about 70, maybe 75, and that is really pushing it on the RPMs. Now, of course, there's no rev limiter. I think they had like an old governor on them or something. But there's also no tachometer. Now, they didn't add the tachometer until later. They just had this really cool star emblem design in the center instead, probably to save on money. The 80s was all about saving on money and fuel and decreasing costs, which, you know, I really wish these trucks had a tachometer, because while yes, you can hear the revs, it would have been a nice feature to add. Now, obviously, you have your basic other gauges, your temp, oil, and basic charge gauge status of your battery, which is pretty unnecessary, and then your fuel gauge right there, which in this truck does still work. Pretty reliable fuel gauges, very slow. It really reminds me of like a 90s Toyota on the speed of the fuel gauge, and it's obviously completely out. Now, something weird that Ford did was that they had 2 fuel tanks, and they had a toggle switch over here to switch in between them. This one still works, but I'm not going to switch it right now, because being so cold, that's when those would freeze, get some water in them, and they would break, and they would almost always fail on these trucks. Now, I think I said this had 75,000 miles, but it has 77,000 miles now, so we drove it a lot more than I remember. That still works, but the one in the other red pickup, it did not work, if I remember right. We had to do some tinkering with it and replace it. Now, my dad's red pickup did not have AC, but this one did have AC. It has a nice toggle switch there, and I just kicked the vents on, so let me shut this key off, which you cannot do just by turning it. You have to push in this lock button over here and then turn the key. So this truck had AC, but it's obviously on R12, and it's long since been bypassed with the emissions and the smog bypass to get better fuel economy. Ironic. And then it had the heater and the defroster. All of this still works. Really nice, odd sounding toggle switch. But these had a lot of vacuum lines behind them. And with that manual switch, it would pull a cable, and they would almost always fail and break. In fact, I don't know that this works anymore in this truck. You can hear that nice click. I really like these old toggle switches. And then this lever I know doesn't work. So once you turned it to heat for the year, you were on heat forever unless you climbed under the dash and pulled that back off. Now, the radios in these, I don't remember if they had FM, they were AM, and they're complete garbage. So everyone put these aftermarket radios in them, and this one no longer works. But pretty basic setup, but you have everything you need. You have music, you have good climate control, you have your basic gauges, you have a nice setup of vents here. Everybody had a CB in their trucks back in the 1980s, especially if you were a farmer, trucker, or a construction worker, which I'm guessing if you bought one of these trucks back in the 80s, you probably were. And this one had a CB in it that we tore out. So did my dad's red pickup, and they did both come from the same seller, but they did not both come from the same place. Now, somebody did add an aftermarket amperage gauge there. This one works. Don't know why they needed that one. And this truck is push button start, which it should not be. And it is also now on a manual choke, which this one was originally on an automatic choke because it's the upgraded custom package. But a lot of these did get a manual choke just built in. Somebody pulled trailers with this back in the day because it has a trailer brake controller. So it's probably was on a camper or something. And then over here, your lights, you'd pull that out for your lights, twist it for your dome light, and this was your windshield washer. So you'd push that in for the sprayers and the cleaners, twist it, you would twist it. You can hear that nice click. You'd twist it for your windshield wipers, and that one didn't pull out. And then a really cool thing on these old trucks is you can see this is just a simple lever right here. All this is your turn signals, and they would illuminate in these panels right here. but your dimmer switch is that little round nubbin right there. So you'd push it down to switch from your high and your low beams. Now, obviously, with dirt and grime and muck, these were not very reliable whatsoever, and that's why they've moved them now to the universal like 6-way switch up here on the column. Now, I said that the blinkers would illuminate in here. Also, your 4-wheel drive and your parking brake indicator would illuminate up in here. Kind of a cool, neat thing that these old trucks used to do. Something that I always really loved to see when Dad would throw it in 4-wheel drive as a kid. So this was a fun truck to drive around. Very basic, very simple, which is also what makes them such good, reliable driving trucks. 2 more things before we go look at the engine. Something else that I found really fun and funky in these trucks is a lot of their smaller ones, the Ranger and the Broncos, had the horn right here that you'd push in on the side, and maybe that's a little bit farther in the future, but these ones had the horn right here, and they're just a nice little, nice sounding horn, which every time I hear that, I think of feeding cows, because we'd always honk that as we'd go out to feed the cows, and all the cows would come running. Now, this is a steering wheel cover. These got just a very thin, basic plastic steering wheel with no padding whatsoever, but I do think that in 1980, 1979, they started adding the collapsible steering column, so you wouldn't at least be impaled in a wreck. And that's a padded dash, or at least what the Safety Administration considered a padded dash back in the day, but you can still see you got metal buttons and things. So this is kind of an in-between urine truck on safety. Obviously, no airbags or other safety features other than your seatbelts, which a lot of times these switches would get gunk in them, and then they would not work and let you out of those seatbelts. And then you have your 4-wheel drive down here, which you could pull back as you needed it, when you needed it. You got 4 high and 4 low all the way back, which obviously you had to be in neutral to engage, and we'll put that back in 2-wheel drive. But if you got stuck in the mud or stuck in the snow, you couldn't just pull that lever back and be in 4-wheel drive. You actually had to physically get out of the truck and turn the manual free spin locking hubs in, so that you could engage it in 4-wheel drive. Obviously, those are more reliable in the long run, and it also means your 4-wheel drive will always engage and always work. And then I think my battery's too dead to show, but oh, yep, these are some of the lights. So that says the brake's on, which it's not, and apparently the 4-wheel drive light has burned out. Yeah. All right, let's go look at this engine. Oh, the 306. This is a really, really good engine, mostly because nothing can go wrong with these. It's in an inline configuration, and they are bare bones basic. Now, this engine was developed in order to get better fuel economy, and while they're not all that powerful, which they were pretty powerful at the time, these engines actually performed surprisingly well for the time period. Now, if you drove this today, you would really feel like you're driving maybe a 4-cylinder Jeep around. So they're not all that bad, but they're pretty slow, sluggish, they rev slow, and they really don't get great fuel economy for today's standards. Back then, 14-15 was really, really good. But you could also get that out of a Chevy 350. Now, I did hear some instances of people getting like 18 out of these trucks. I don't really know if that's possible, because I could only get about 15, 16 out of this truck. So they also added smog and smog pumps, which would go right over here. And this one's had them all deleted and all those lines, smog lines, bypassed and whatnot. They were naturally aspirated, and they usually had a single barrel carb on top. Now, some of them might have got a 2-barrel, but you can see all of the emissions are deleted on this truck. They were still on a mechanical fuel pump, which we replaced this one last year, and they really never ever broke down. Now, not to say that even though these were super reliable, people really did not put a ton of miles on these trucks. They just didn't drive as much back then, and the rest of the truck really wasn't that good. So even though these were a great engine, the rest of the truck really wasn't that amazing. But these are coming back in popularity. Everybody's got to love a good bullnose. And there you have it. That is my dad's 1980 F-150. This F-150 was special because it was kind of my first truck that I could tinker with and do my own things and modifications with. And I had a toolbox in the back of it back in the day and a mismatched tailgate. And we used to, my sister and I used to love to take the dogs for a ride on Sundays, and I'd drive this truck to school, and I spent hours and hours cleaning it out when we first got it, because it sat out in a barnyard all winter and was mice infested. And I did a lot of work to this truck, at least to me as a high school student back then. This is kind of the truck that really got me into having a project truck and then being able to finish something and really enjoy driving it and using it when we got done. I did grow up learning to drive manual, and I had this truck before I even knew how to drive an automatic. So this is a cool truck from my past, my history, something I wanted to share with you guys, and something also I wanted you to see, because the F-150 from the 1980s to even like 1995-7 changed drastically. This was a completely different era of the automotive industry, and it's getting to be that classic cool era that people are starting to really think about having as projects, think about rebuilding, and think about driving around, because now these trucks are cool. Back when I drove this truck, you know, several years ago, 10 years ago, these were not cool trucks. Everybody, and maybe I shouldn't say everybody, that might trigger some people, but my generation, I always thought growing up that these trucks were just complete garbage and trash and completely unreliable, because they were compared to today's standards. But these were really, really good trucks when they were brand new, and they're starting to become popular, and I can totally understand why. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram for more content. I'm going to try to post here more regularly, so if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, get out, enjoy your automotive ownership, and I'll catch you in the next video.